you can invest in our culture, then you should be able to invest in our humanity.
If I'm not actively involved in protests, should I feel bad or pressured to do so?
I wear ball caps. I wear cargo shorts and T-shirts when I'm not at work. I drive a truck. So somebody might look at me and think different kind of thoughts about me. Maybe I'm a redneck. Maybe I'm even racist. They might think that, but they'd be wrong. I never even to mention somebody's skin color or where they come from, because it doesn't really matter. I don't understand what's happening. It's wrong. All of it.
How and when do you think is the best time for parents to have the uncomfortable conversation about racism with their children?
I can't do all these things for people. I got to live my life authentically, right? Whatever that means. And if that means I don't post a black sign, that doesn't mean I'm not black or for Black Matters. It just means that's just not the fight I'm into that day. Today we're having an intimate conversation on diversity and racism with a leader in the diversity and inclusion space. Her name is Tirrany, and we're going to tackle the intimate conversation around these topics.
Put your hands to the sky. Randomly Rasheeda. How do
On today's episode of How Do I ... we're having a real conversation with Tirrany. She is not only a psychologist, or am I saying that right? Are you a psychologist?
I'm a licensed counselor.
Licensed counselor, and she's also a diversity leader at one of the major colleges in the DMV area. We're going to talk today, and I brought in my sons as well, because we're talking about Black Matters, we're talking about things that affect the community, and we're most importantly talking about diversity and racism. So that being said, Tirrany, I'm going to kind of let you drive this interview. How about that?
Sure. You know, we're at a time where we're talking about Black Lives Matter, like Black Lives Mattering exactly, and we're on the cusp of the COVID virus, in addition to these huge uprisings that are happening around the country. So I'm curious about you two as young men. What are things that you may be feeling as you're observing what's going on around our country?
Well, yeah, I mean, I see people posting about like how they're scared that like one of their family members might not come back home from like work or something from doing nothing, and they might get shot from anybody, because I don't know, they might not come back home from.
Do you feel fear as being a black man? Do you sense some feelings about that?
No, right now, no, because like, I mean, I'm at home and I don't really go nowhere like that, so I don't really worry about things like that happening to me. Right now, I deserve it.
What about you, Kyle? Because you're soon to be 18, so you're going to be graduating soon and going out to the world. How do you feel?
Me, I mean, I just stay to myself, my business, and I mean, how I feel, like, I just feel like everybody just needs to protect themselves for real. Like, if you see like a cop like messing up with other people and whatnot, I know it's like kind of hard to like do a role, like a civil role, to get the cop up off them, because you might get shot too or whatever. So it's really hard to put yourself in a situation where you need to like help a civilian out if like they're getting like really hurt by a police officer and whatnot. So really, I mean, like, we got video cameras, so all you gotta do is just record and just hope for the best, you know what I'm saying? With all these uprisings, I think it's a good thing, but I don't like all the looting and vandalism and whatnot. That right there is not called for, but I do stand for all the protesting, and I understand all the pain and whatnot, why everybody's doing all that. It makes a lot of sense, but there's still no reason to do all that.
Tirrany's going to give us some information on how to have tough conversations with our children, our loved ones, as parents and as caregivers. Now, Tiffany, what do you say to parents who are trying to have these conversations with their sons, be it if they're white or they're black? What conversations should they have with their kids?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things that we can talk about when it comes to how to have this conversation with children, depending upon how old they are, first and foremost. So, Kyle and Jace, how old are you two?
I'm 17.
You're 17?
14.
14. So this is a time where I don't know how you feel, Rasheeda, as a mom raising young black men. I mean, that's a part of it as well. But I think it's important for parents to sit down with their children and say, there's a lot happening in the world right now, and I want you to know that I care for you and I love you and your life does matter to me, and opening up that space to have the conversation about how you may feel about what's going on. And I do want to specify some things when it pertains to feeling. Many times when we talk to young men in particular, because men haven't always been socialized to talk about their feelings, but when we talk about feelings, we're essentially talking about emotions such as fear, sorrow, sadness, anger, joy, elation, embarrassment. Those are feelings. Sometimes for young people in particular, young men, you'll ask, how are you doing? They're like, I'm good.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I'm straight. I'm alright.
Right.
But you want to ask a little bit, ask deeper questions, such as, how does your heart feel at this moment given the circumstances?
That's good.
And if you're a parent that has a tendency to ask questions and then just keep talking, I'm going to encourage you to take a moment to pause and give your children a moment to reflect on what you just asked them. Because it's a lot to take in. There's a lot happening right now. I mean, we think about with the COVID situation, young men like yourselves, you've been out of school for a substantial amount of time. You've missed prom, you've missed track season and baseball and other spring sports. You've missed opportunities to hang out with your friends. You've probably been inundated with your parents for the last several months and just really feeling maybe cooped up, really isolated. So they're contending with that, in addition to what's happening to black men in our country. So asking questions, taking a moment to give them time to reflect on the question that you just asked. And if they don't respond to the feeling question, then move to certain parts of the body. So tell me a little bit about how your heart may be feeling at this moment. What have you been thinking about? Because thinking is based on cognition, right? What's on your mind? What have you observed? And when you move from those questions, hopefully it'll open up the door for more dialogue about what they're thinking, feeling, what they're also seeing.
Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. John F. Kennedy.
We did talk about it to a certain degree, like the looting, and you wanted to go downtown Atlanta and get involved, and I thought, every fight is not our battle. And I hate to say it that way, but I mean, when I say that is, you can be supportive of the cause without being in the center of the cause. Because there were so many people who got killed by random bullets or just weird stuff. And I don't want to be a part of that. And I don't want to have my sons be a part of that. But I think maybe you can help us understand better ways to be a part of the cause without being in the heart of the cause.
Right. I think it's really important to understand, too, that each person has their own individualized way of protesting. So what I strongly encourage parents and young people to understand is that we should be mindful of how we critique other people's protest. Mm-hmm. So I know you just said a moment ago about you don't agree with the looting and the vandalism, which is you're entitled to that. But what it means for us to take a moment and pause and not be too critical about how other people are protesting in this moment, but also being mindful that there are people that are protesting in these moments of resistance, and their intentions are not of resistance. Their intentions are to be agitators. Their intentions are to create harm to other people. And unfortunately, that is what gets the media's attention, and it perpetuates this notion that Black Lives Matter, the movement, is one of heartache and pain and vandalism and struggle, and that's not what this is about. Peaceful protests are important, but we also have historically known that peaceful protests have not always gotten us the response that we desired. Right. So there takes a larger form of resistance. Now, so one way of again, the one part is not critiquing the way people protest, but if you do see people doing something you don't agree with, think about what you do agree with. So maybe for you as young men and as a mother of young men, you write a letter to your congressman, your senator, you make posts on Facebook, you give money to different causes that you agree with. Maybe you volunteer in some other capacity. Maybe you ask your job to support these causes in some fashion. So your protest belongs to you, and it's an individual way in which you protest.
Now, equality is the soul of liberty. There is, in fact, no liberty without it.
I see a lot of posts on Facebook where there's non-African Americans saying, well, what can I do? Is it okay that I do hashtag Black Lives Matter? how do you help the non-black people in this moment?
Yeah. I think it's really important for, because there's people of color and there's white people, right? If we really just, if we think about it kind of objectively, so to speak, it's people of color, there's people of color and then there's white people. And I think what you're referring to is our white people. How do white people get involved in this? And I want to say this very, very clearly, is that racism is not to be cured by people of color, because people of color did not create racism. Right? We have been on the receiving end of racist ideologies and racist practices and discriminatory practices that have greatly impacted our lives. So white people have to be held accountable, and accountability means you too being in positions of sharing your power, sharing your privilege. So if you see something happening, that means you speak up about it. You talk to your white allies about how we can be supportive to Black Lives Matter and other issues that impact people of color. So for white people that may be watching or consider themselves as allies of the Black community or the community of various communities of color, yes, you may hashtag Black Lives Matter, but I also want to ask you, what are you doing in addition to posting that hashtag? Are you donating funds? Are you supporting schools and making sure that their curriculum is inclusive of stories of color? Are you supporting men and women of color in their various achievements? Are you asking your alumni association to make sure scholarships go to Black and brown men and women that go to those institutions? So how are you utilizing your power to ensure that change is being made is a way in which your allyship can be expanded.
Sometimes you just need a break. You need to be alone to figure everything out by yourself.
But should people feel like they have to do something? For example, when COVID first came out, right? Everyone was like, oh, you should come out of this thing with like a new skill set, a new whatever. So there's a certain amount of pressure put on people if they succumb to it, to say, I better be great when this is all over. Or people don't think I'm just a loser and didn't do anything in this moment. Well, some people just need to take a moment, and this is their moment to do that. Then I'm reading all these companies now. Ben & Jerry, I think, was the latest one, and they're putting out these statements about diversity and Black Lives Matters and how they're handling those sort of things. Do you feel that you have to be so external with what you do, or do you have to do anything as a Black person or a white person? Can you just exist?
Yeah. That's a beautiful question, Rasheeda. That's a beautiful question. And with that being said, I think about this phenomenal poem by Nikki Giovanni. And she starts off by saying, like, I thought that I could be the revolutionary that tells white folks how to handle these situations. I thought I could be the person during a protest to speak calm and certainty into the crowd. And then she ends by saying that, but the next morning I woke up and I dug, and what I realized is that being a natural woman is a revolution. So for many people, it's important to understand that being safe within your oneness, within your humanity, and identifying your own power in your humanity is a revolution in its own right, right? Waking up in the morning and saying to yourself in the mirror, and I don't know if you all practice affirmations, but saying, I am strong, I am intelligent, I'm a winner. You being sturdy in your oneness is also a form of political protest, in the forms of like Audre Lorde, where we talk about I have to practice radical self-love, because radical self-love is a way in which I care for myself. So this idea that people have to do, because people feel like they have to go out and exercise, that means they have to, post something on social media. Right. That means that they have to get out and protest. They have to make a poster. They have to put a sign in their yard. And sometimes sitting in your home and being reflective of how your life has been impacted by power, privilege, systemic racism, or even reading some books about how this impacts your lives is a great way to protest.
I like that.
So this idea of doing something isn't always necessary. Sometimes being is a form of political protest. You have to find the protest. You have to find the best way to protest for yourself. And I think what you just alluded to, Rasheeda, is so important, because this is a time where people are immensely overwhelmed. Yeah. They are, when I said a moment ago about asking your kids about how they feel, overwhelm leads to anxiety. Anxiety can potentially lead to depression. Depression can typically lead to like some behaviors that may not be healthy for you to sustain your mental health and your mental hygiene. So for those individuals that are feeling like, what do I do? There's this that says this, and this that says that, and this that says this. I think you have to take a moment and realize, what does your heart desire as a form of protest for you at this very moment. So if it's posting a blackout sign on your social media, that's one way. Maybe your way of, again, contributing is to give money or to give time. But it's very important to be mindful of how you want to protest and calm your angst during this time of uncertainty, because there's a tremendous amount of it.
Do you guys feel anxious when you watch the news, Chase? Do you feel any anxiety or stress in some level?
I mean, like, sometimes, I mean, like,
Look over
not
here,
really.
talk to us.
I mean, not really, but like sometimes whenever like I see stuff happen, like I think of it, like I could be in that position. So I think of like, what if I'm like, what if that was my brother, and I could have that same problem.
How about you, Kyle? Do you feel any anxiety or stress or pressure to be one way or the other?
Not really. I mean, sometimes I just feel stress, like whenever I see like posts of like black people getting hurt, and like really anybody getting hurt by police brutality. So, you know what I'm saying? That's really about it. Like, I don't feel anxiety or nothing like that. I just feel a little stressed, and that's about it.
Well, that's a form of anxiety too, is it not?
Yeah. Stress and anxiety can be utilized interchangeably. So obviously there's good stress, which I'm sure you felt before. Like, good stress is the stress you feel where you're like, I know I have a test on Friday and I'm going to study really, really hard for this test because I want to make a good grade. And so you're like almost your sense of awareness is heightened because you want to make sure that you do really well on the test. That's considered eustress. And then there's other forms of stress that can be a little bit detrimental to our being, which are, and we don't talk about this often, but post-traumatic stress and trauma associated with young people and people of color consistently seeing themselves being victims to brutality in any form, whether that's through police brutality, whether that's through you all seeing classmates be assaulted or denigrated in a classroom setting by a faculty member or by a coach. Sometimes there's stress associated with the things that you don't experience directly, which is obviously what we're experiencing right now. This, what we consider like vicarious trauma, where you see someone else experiencing the trauma and they may articulate it to you, and now you're feeling somewhat empathic to their experience. I want to say this to everyone watching. When we see men of color and women of color victimized on television, and it's perpetuated through social media like Instagram and Facebook, that's traumatizing. So you think about young people, and even old people, it doesn't have to have an age on it, who's already experiencing some form of stress in their life. So we have this COVID situation going on right now. People are losing their jobs. So people are stressed with the idea of like, well, how do I feed my children? How do I pay my bills? How do I have money in my pocket? And now you see this on TV where there's a man of color being killed, and you're like, there's no reason for that, for the knee of a police officer to be on a man's neck when he's already restrained.
Right.
That's traumatizing. So what happens is it's compounded trauma. So you have your life experience, your life stress, and then you may have a little bit more stress and a little bit more stress, and then you have these environmental factors that are compounding, and before you know, it's like layers on a cake, and people just erupt. And that's why you have what we have now, which is this unrest and AKA these riots that are happening all across the country.
Gotcha. Does that make sense to you guys?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we be the change?
Yeah.
What do you think is the solution?
Yeah. I think there are a number of things that can be helpful in mitigating experiences like this, so that we don't continue to get to a riot format for the next several years. I think that we as people of color have to consistently demand that the system be equitable for us. You know, I'm sure you all are young, amazing, brilliant, talented young men right now, and I'm sure you're going to grow into amazing, brilliant, talented men. But right now, at this moment, what does it mean to be in a classroom setting and be able to look at your curriculum and wonder, why aren't I reflected in this curriculum? Why are we learning about these historical figures and consistently I'm looked at as like the slave in that space? So I'm asking teachers to demand more culturally inclusive pedagogy in books and writing materials in their classrooms. I'm asking coaches to enlist in bias training and racial diversity training for their teams. I'm asking for community members to gather and hold their elected officials accountable for what they need to make sure they feel safe. I'm asking for young men to share their stories, but also understand self-care is a great form of political protest, that whatever you need for your humanity is important, right? If you need to rest, then rest. If you need to go out and jog, and even it's challenging right now given the circumstances, but take care of yourself by any means necessary. When we think about some of our American leaders, most of them are men, most of them are white, they're Christian, and particularly in history, they were landowners, which meant that they had some type of wealth access or access to some type of money, correct? But what happens to the stories that aren't told? What happened to the Native American and the indigenous people, their stories? What happened to men of color? What happened to the Japanese when they were brought here to work on the railroads? What happened to those stories?
Tirrany describes the term spirit murder.
There's an attorney by the name of Patricia Williams that coined the term spirit murder. And what she essentially said is that individuals that participate in racist practices murder the spirit of other people. So when you're followed around a store, not that I'm projecting this onto you, but if you've ever experienced this, when you're followed around a store and the assumption is that you may be stealing,
Right.
or even when you go to a restaurant and the assumption is that you may not leave a good tip, right? People of color don't tip.
Right.
Or if you're driving your car and you're pulled over because your music is loud, because maybe you just like listening to Jay-Z, you know? And Patricia Williams coined the term spirit murder because she believes that racism and the practice of racism murders the spirit of people. So we have to start calling it out in education, in sports, in entertainment. The perpetuation of men dying on television, it murders the spirit.
I don't look at people and see color and race. I see their insides.
What do you feel about, for example, I grew up in Connecticut and I remember being the only black girl in the classroom and we were talking about history and heritage.
Oh, yeah.
So of course I had to talk about Africa, and I hated the thought of talking about Africa because it just, I don't know, even at that age, I was probably in like second grade, I was like, oh, please just skip over me. I hope we don't have enough time when the bell rings. I just did not want to talk about it. It forced me to have to reconcile because I didn't see color. And now I'm being forced to differentiate myself in a classroom where I already feel oddly different because I have all these white friends. So I was reading something recently and people were talking about the you shouldn't say I don't see color. And I don't remember how the saying went, but it was like, don't say you don't see color, just something weird. I can't remember what it is. Maybe you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Like, should you raise your kids to not see color? Is that so wrong? Because I say that all the time. When they start talking crazy, I go, oh no, we don't do that in this house. The rules are we love everybody. Yes, there are going to be white people who do crazy stuff and there are going to be black people who do crazy stuff. But we don't hate all white people and we don't hate all black people.
Of course.
You have to figure out that it's that person who happens to be that color that I may not agree with in that moment. So do you think it's okay to say I don't see color?
Yeah. So I get that question often, right? So there's work that I do around diversity education, and we talk about intent versus impact, right? So you raising your children to quote unquote not see color, your intentions are to raise your children where they see the intentions of humanity and not attribute it to race. Right? So you want to see the good in people. It's like that age-old statement about, don't judge a book by its cover. Right? Because if we were to judge a book by its cover, we would make up all kinds of assumptions about who you are as black men, as a tall person, as a brown person, as a male, so on and so forth. But the impact of that too is that we dismiss the lived experiences of people based upon their race. Okay? So when we say things like we don't see color, let's be mindful, color informs decision making. So while you may not see color, the police see color. While you may not see color, the white female teacher that's teaching your sons see color. So while you may not see color, the security guard at the mall sees color.
Gotcha.
Right? So when we say things like we don't see color, what our intentions are is to say that we judge people based upon the content of their character, right? Which is a phenomenal attribute to have, right? To raise our children to ensure that they are people of integrity, the people that they are honest, that they are forthright, that they are fortified in their values, that they have beliefs that keep them postured, and not make decisions solely upon skin color. So when we think about socialization over time, we have attributed value to certain things. So over time, we've given certain characteristics to men, such as you're supposed to be masculine, you're supposed to be strong, you're supposed to be the provider of your family, you're supposed to be fortified. We've given terms to people of color, which sometimes has been one to be lazy, to not be hardworking, to be uneducated, and then we sometimes do things like we tokenize people, like, oh, he's smart, or he sounds different than what I'm used to, or oh, I didn't imagine you live in this house. So all these ideas around social bias and stereotype, because things change over time, because value and definitions change over time. And that is why, too, when we say things like we're in a post-racial society, there's this idea that because we had a president that was black, that we now live in a society that no longer sees race as a means of crippling people in their ability to attain success. But all that has happened is that we've just changed the definitions over time. It's still the same thing, it's just changed over time. So when we think about socialization, it's about value, it's about attribution, essentially like what is attributed to something, it's about definitions, and it's about how that's been embedded in us over time. However, love and compassion and fairness don't always dismantle racism. They don't dismantle racism. Because unfortunately, love, fairness, and kindness sometimes will make you complicit in the perpetuation of racism. Does that make sense? You understand what complicit in the perpetuation? Essentially, you'll be in agreement and you'll just let it keep going because you want to be nice to people. So you don't want to call people out. You want to be nice. You don't want to disrupt them too much. But the only way people will learn is if you bring them in and have a conversation with them about how what they said or what they did was offensive.
Oh yeah, you have to fight for yourself. So I remember years ago, I was working at a company and I was up to be promoted to manager. And it was me, a black woman, and it was a white guy who was a contractor. So he wasn't even a permanent employee. And they said, well, Rasheeda, we'll give you the job, but we'll let you bask in the job for 6 months, like do a test run before we give you the money. And I was like, well, if he gets the job, you're gonna give him the money right away. So what's the difference? And I thought about it, and just so happens, it's good to know people. He used to be one of the judges in Atlanta, but he was now the president of the Atlanta chapter of the EEOC. Okay. So I called him and I said, this is happening to me. He goes, oh no, this is what you're gonna do. And I'm so glad I had him in my corner because my normal self would have been like, okay, I'm just gonna let that go. But I'm a fighter at the same time, so he just kind of lit that fire under me to go fight. And I did. I took it to HR and I said, this is what's happening. I feel aggrieved. And I never really stood up to that degree. And all the people were white. And so I'm in there with these white HR people. And I told them, I said, I don't feel this is right. And I'll tell you why I feel this isn't right. And I want to prevail at the end of the day. I didn't get the job, which was a blessing in disguise, but I got the money, which was perfect by me because I like what I was doing anyway. But what happened as an aha was not only did my manager get fired, because that's just what happens in technology, but the guy who they promoted and gave that job to, he got fired.
Wow.
So something was protecting me anyway from getting a job because I would have probably got let go, but I got the money. But it was a good example of how I don't think that was racially charged, but it very well could have been, depending on whose lens was doing the viewing, right? But it was an opportunity to say, this is wrong, I don't believe it's right, and I'm not going to let you do that to me.
Yeah.
You see?
Absolutely. And while you may not think that was racially charged, but it lacked equity. That was not an equitable practice for your organization to extend it to you and say, oh, we'll try it for 6 months. But you know for sure they would not have done that to the male.
Nope.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to fight for yourself. I think you do have to stand up for yourself even in these times. But there's a time to fight and there's a time to kind of sit back and make change from a silent perspective, I think. Yeah. Or a not so in your face, I did this on Facebook or I did this for the gram. You know what I mean? And I don't want people to feel pressured to have to do that sort of thing. And that's why we're having this conversation, so you can help people see, there's no real right, I don't think, and there's no real wrong. but I think everyone has to be true to themselves in this moment, because there's a lot of crazy going on, and it will drive you crazier if you're driven by the direction of social media or the direction of the news. So
you can't control what the next spin is going to be. Like, you can't control what's the next video or photograph that's on your timeline, and before you know it, you're ingesting that, and it has the ability to alter your affect. It has the ability to make you sad, or make you laugh, or make you happy, or make you mad. It can control you. And so it's really important to be mindful of what we're ingesting during this time period. And so I can't stress self-care enough. Self-care is an example of self-care is creating a boundary to how much you ingest on a daily basis when it comes to the information. Like, you don't have to take in a tremendous amount of earth-shattering news through social media or through just the regular television news to be informed. Like, while today the country may be in an uproar, tomorrow or sometime we will go back to an area. We will go back to what we consider to be equilibrium. We will go to a level with a space where this levels off. But that does not mean by any means that your lives matter any less. Our country and our world has operated in a fashion where Black life was disposable. And so when we say Black Lives Matter, it has nothing to do with the magnitude of other people's lives having any less magnitude. It just means that we as a people are affirming that our existence is important, our contribution matters, our families are glorious, our intellect is beautiful, our skin, our melanin is captivating, and that our existence, our presence is one to be reckoned with, and that we matter.
Well, we thank you, Tiffany. Tirrany, do you have anything you guys want to ask Tirrany? Anything you want to clarify, or you're good?
Yeah, I'm sure.
You always talking behind the scenes. Well, I hope that you guys took something away from this conversation, because I wanted them to be a part of it, because I thought it was applicable, for one. Yeah. And you're great at what you do, and I know you have a voice, and you can impart wisdom and knowledge from a different perspective. So I'm happy that Tirrany was here to shed that light with us and with my sons. And we're just thankful that you were able to grace us with your presence as you pass through.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. On that note, we'll just shut it down, Charles.
If you're not on Facebook, be sure to follow us on social media, Instagram, Randomly Rasheeda, and Twitter, or visit randomlyrasheeda.com.